everyone, and welcome to a new podcast episode. I know it has been such a long time coming. My last podcast episode was my Lento sweater, which was back in March. So I do apologize for leaving you in the lurch for so long. Well, not really, because I've had some other videos come out since then. I've had actually quite a few videos come out since then, but this is the first podcast episode in a while, and if you enjoyed the podcast episodes the most, here's another one. I'm sorry it took so long. And of course, in this episode, I'm going to talk about why it took so long to get another podcast episode. But first, it is time for the mug of the episode. And today I'm using a brand new mug. I received this mug as a gift from my soon-to-be sister-in-law. And of course, I got it at my bridal shower, which was last weekend. And I have lots to tell you about that and what it took to get something to wear to it, which is what this video is all about. But first, cheers! Today, I am drinking some of my favorite tea, World Tea House After 8, which is their mint chocolate variety, and I'm, loving every cup. So, in addition to this being a new podcast episode, it is also the second video in my knitted wedding series, which I started with my first video, What Am I Knitting for My Wedding? I will leave a link in the description so you can go watch that if you haven't. And this podcast episode is going to be detailing what I knit for my bridal shower, because I had plans of only having one thing for my bridal shower. I ended up getting 3, but no, technically 2.5. One is not finished, but I am here to tell you all the dirty details about the process that I went through to make a top for my bridal shower. And because I have 3 patterns to go through, I'm going to go through them chronologically based on when I started them. And I'm going to wear each one while I talk about them. And of course, I'm going to insert some footage here of me wearing the item just so you can get a really good look at what I liked about them and what I didn't like about them. So without further ado, let's get started with the first pattern. So we're starting off with the unfinished pattern. And if you've seen my Instagram lately, you'll know that when I was talking about how I was going to be recording this episode, I was going to be chatting about 2 of my favorite size-inclusive designers, and one designer who I thought was size-inclusive, but is turning out to not really be so. And you're probably realizing right now, this is that one designer. And I am not a badmouther. That's not how I roll. I just like to provide honest and truthful reviews of my experience knitting patterns. And if that happens to say something negative about a design, it's how I experienced the design. This pattern is the Antiquity blouse by Souffle Knitwear, and I'll insert a picture right here of the finished sample so you can see what it looks like. Obviously, it is very different than what I have on right now, but we'll chat about why mine looks so different. This was actually my very first choice of a pattern to make for my bridal shower. When I was thinking about what I wanted to make, I really wanted to use a certain yarn that I had in my stash, and that is this lovely pink yarn. It is by Mary and May, and unfortunately the company is no longer around, so you are not able to get any of this yarn anymore. But it is a stellina base sock yarn, and its colorway is called Emergency Contact. It was dyed based on the cover of the book of the same name, and I fell in love when I saw it. I thought it was just a gorgeous light pink, but not cotton candy little girl pink. It was like an adult version of that. I love a good pink, but I also don't want to look like I'm 10 years old. But I really wanted to use that yarn for my bridal shower because Doyle gifted me this yarn for my birthday back in 2021, I think. So I've had it for a couple years. I actually did try and knit this into a different pattern before, and I talked about that in my Everything I Knitted in 2022 video, which I'll link in the description below. I had started a different sweater realized it was not going to work. It wasn't a size inclusive sweater to begin with, and I tried to modify it, but I didn't do my math correctly, and I didn't realize it till I'd already done the whole yoke and I had started on the body of the sweater. It happens. Or should I say, knit happens. So anyway, I frogged that yarn shortly before my bridal shower, and I thought I would really like to knit a top with this yarn so that I can wear yarn that Doyle gave me at my bridal shower leading up to our wedding. So I loved that sort of romantic idea, and I was looking through patterns that used that size yarn, and I stumbled upon not stumbled because I had it in my favorites for a long time, but I took another look at the Antiquity blouse by Souffle Knitwear. And I should say, before I start talking about the pattern, I have been hit and miss with Souffle Knitwear patterns lately. The first pattern that I ever knitted for Helene was actually a test knit for her of her Capulet blouse, which I'll put a picture of right here. And I did that back in like 2018 or something. It was a long time ago. And I absolutely loved that top. Unfortunately, the alpaca that I knitted it out of was extremely itchy, so I ended up donating it, but I really loved that pattern and it fit me really nicely. Then I moved on. The next pattern that I did for her was another test knit that did not work out for me at all, and I ended up frogging it. And that was during 2020, I think, because I remember it was during lockdown. It was the summer of our first lockdown, so it must have been summer of 2020. And I don't have a picture of that because it looked so awful on me. But if you're particularly curious, you can go check out my Ravelry. It's on there, with extensive notes about why it worked and why it didn't for me. So that pattern did not work out. So at that point, I was 50-50. One really worked out, one really did not. And then last spring, I was looking for a pattern to knit, and I already knew what yarn I was using. I knew what my gauge was, and I searched for a pattern based on gauge, and then I found a lot, but couldn't really nail one down. So I asked some of my friends on Instagram their suggestions, and the Sugar Plum Jumper by Souffle Knitwear was suggested. And I knew I had knit her patterns before. One had worked out, one had not. I thought, yeah, I'll take the risk. I'll buy the pattern and I'll try and knit this pattern. And it was a bottom-up raglan construction specifically. And if you've seen that video, you know that pattern really did not work out for me. And I was just so frustrated with that entire pattern. I have done a video all about it. I'll link that below. You can watch it. So I thought to myself, okay, bottom-up raglans are a no-go for me anymore. Sizing just doesn't work. And then came time to pick a bridal shower top. And I was drawn in by the Antiquity blouse because I love a good vintage style, and I just loved the design of the front panel of that sweater. I loved the mohair sleeves. I just thought, this is so romantic. This is so beautiful. I want to make this for my bridal shower. And I knew I was going to do one little alteration. I was going to do short sleeves instead of the long full sleeves. And I started the pattern, and I started running into problems. So I now have learned my lesson. Souffle knitwear patterns do not work for me at the size that I am now. So when I knit her Capulet blouse, it was either size extra large or 2XL. I think it was extra large, but I know that one fit. But all three of the consecutive patterns that I knit of hers afterwards were size 3X or larger. I think I might have done 4X for this, but I can't remember in the moment right now. All I know is that the sizing is not the same as it is with the smaller size. Or rather, the grading is not the same with the smaller size as it is with this size. So what I mean by that is, when a designer creates multiple sizes of a pattern, they need to grade that pattern to different measurements for different sizes. If the designer just adds extra stitches to make it bigger all over, it's not going to fit properly because I might have a bigger bust size than someone who is a smaller size than me, but I don't necessarily have a smaller neck, and I don't necessarily have a smaller wrist. And I don't necessarily get significantly longer than someone who is a smaller size. So if you just expand out and expand up and think that that's going to work for a bigger size, it does not. You need to grade it appropriately so that the parts of your body that don't grow at the same rate as the rest of you don't get overly large either. So that was one problem. That was actually the problem that I have with the sugar plum jumper, is that the raglan decreases were done at the same rate for every single size, meaning that for my 3X size that I knit to go from the large bust measurement that I had to my neck measurement, I was doing significantly more decreases than someone who knit a smaller size. So my yoke, instead of being, let's say, this long, was this long, and it did not fit at all. It was completely too big and it looked awful on me. So my problem that I had with this pattern, and I've realized is the problem that I've had with every single Fable knitwear pattern that I have ever made, and that is that the length is too short. Hélène is a very petite woman with a very small bust, and the lengths that she gives in her patterns do not work across all sizes, especially at the higher end of the size range where I was knitting. So I'm going to stand up and show you how long this pattern is. I did modifications, and I'm going to talk you through those. So you don't see my head very much anymore, but you can see what the length looks like. I'm sorry it's a little awkward. I'm standing at the corner of my bed, and it's kind of hard to get any further back and still, be able to show you properly. So here is my top. And the way the pattern is written, you need to do so many repeats of this beautiful frontal lace panel. For my size, it said to do 3 repeats. Well, 1 repeat is these 2 bobble sections. So this right here. That's about 2 inches, give or take. So 3 of them stops here. And when I tried that on, it told me it wanted me to put my underarms there. Let me turn to the side. That's where the 3 repeats ends. So let me just hike that up just to show you. Here are my 3 repeats. Get this a little better. There we go. This is how long 3 repeats are. This barely covers my bust. It's the entirety of my bust right here. So then it said, after doing your 3 repeats, if you want a low neckline, only do another 1 centimeter of the lace panel. Clearly that was out for me. If you wanted a mid-length neckline, it said to do a half of a repeat, which is 1 section of bobbles. That's about 1 inch. And if you wanted a high neckline, it said to do another full repeat. So there is the full length that I can get from this top, including the quote-unquote high neckline. Take a look at that. That is a bralette for me. And that was never going to work. So, clearly, I did extra repeats. So, there's my 3 for my so-called full length. I then did a whole another repeat before I did my underarms. So I did another full 2 inches just to get to the underarm length. So from here to here, it's 4 repeats. I then realized I don't think I can go with the short or the mid neckline. I was never going to go with the short, but I thought I might go with the mid length. After seeing how long these repeats actually were for me, I decided, no, I have to go with the high neckline. And in my opinion, the high neckline gives me a lovely low cut top. And this is the problem that I had with this pattern. And upon looking back, it's the problem that I've had with every single one of Helen's patterns. And this is not in any way a bashing of her patterns. This is an honest review of my experience as a plus size knitter making one of her patterns. Because that's what my channel is all about. It's not about bashing anybody. It's about giving an honest review. And after doing those modifications, it looked okay. Honest to goodness, like this does not look terrible. I'm actually, I really love this front lace panel. It's beautiful. It's got this cute little bobble lace hem, which to be honest was a nightmare to work because you start it on row 1. There is no setup row after you cast on your stitches. And there were some really tricky stitches to do, like a knit 3 together in your cast on row. Nuts. So that's another problem that I have with this pattern. There really should have been a setup row. There is no reason why there could not have been one single knit row that would be hidden anyway. But that's a topic for another conversation. We're talking about fit right now. So really, it doesn't look that bad. And after I finished my shoulder straps, which did not follow the length in the pattern, I knit what I thought worked for my length. And honestly, it's a cute little scoop neck. I really like that. So then it came time to do the collar and sleeve details of the pattern, which are both knit in mohair. So if you look at the pattern sample, which I'll put a picture of here again so you can compare side by side, both the front panel and the collar are bound off using the picot bind off. Now I actually can't stand doing the picot bind off. The first time I ever did it, I had a massive issue where I did not calculate the right amount of yarn that I needed for the bind off, and I got maybe 4 or 5 little neps in, and then I realized I didn't have enough yarn. I had to go back, and I did not know how to properly undo it. This was still relatively early into me learning how to knit, and I ended up creating this massive gaping hole in my project because as I was trying to carefully undo my picot bind off, somehow a million stitches dropped and I ended up with this huge gaping hole. I was knitting a shawl at the time. This might attribute to why I don't knit shawls very often because they're a nightmare. At least for me. I know a lot of people love knitting shawls, but for me they're a nightmare. Anyway, I have since then sworn off picot bind off. I will do anything other than that. And I knew with this pattern, I would have to find something a little different. And when I was looking for delicate or decorative bind offs, I realized I didn't like any of them for this part of the neckline. So I thought I'll just knit that one off plain. It'll be fine. Then when it came to the collar, the first time I did the collar, I tried to do a decorative scalloped edged border that I found on YouTube. I'm not going to link you that video because it was a disaster and it looked nothing like the video, so I do not recommend it. But I realized after doing that bind off or starting to do that bind off, this is not working. I can't stand this. And I thought, okay, let's undo this bind off, get back to my last row, and try a different bind off. Well, this is knit in mohair. And mohair sticks to itself like Velcro. So I knew I had seen a tip on Instagram about putting mohair in the freezer in order to frog it. I left it in my freezer for 2 days, took it out, it's still Velcro. I could not get it apart whatsoever. I was extremely frustrated. I knew I had extra mohair, so I just cut the collar all off of this pattern. And I took out all the little pieces of yarn and I picked up and started the collar again. I knit the collar a second time and I do a normal bind off because I don't know what else to do at this point. Let's at least try it and see what it looks like. I hated the collar so much. I don't have pictures because I hated it that much. I didn't even take a picture. I then thought to myself, okay, collar's out. I'm going to have to figure out something else to do to keep these stockinette straps from curling in on themselves like they're doing right now. But I thought, I'll come to that problem after I do the sleeves. Let's start the sleeves. As you can see, I have started a sleeve. It did not get very far. This pattern was going from bad to worse. So, the problem with the sleeves. I have put this into a reel on Instagram. It is my most popular reel that I have ever made, and it was the silliest, quickest, I don't even know why this is blowing up video. Because all I'm doing is standing in front of my mirror, holding my phone in front of my face, recording myself looking at this sleeve with a Taylor Swift song over it. So I think it's going viral because, well, not viral, but like it's my most popular one. So I guess it's kind of viral for me. This reel has almost 30,000 views. All I'm doing is showing off the unfinished sleeve of my sweater saying this is not working out with a Taylor Swift song in the background saying this is why we can't have nice things. So I think it's the T-Swift song that's making it go viral. Anyway, I am not happy with these sleeves, as you can probably tell. I do still have the yarn attached. I think it's sitting behind me, or maybe I'm sitting on top. I'm sitting on top of it now. So the yarn is still attached. I did not frog this yet. I didn't frog the sleeve, and I didn't frog the whole thing yet, because I wanted to show it off in this video and give myself another opportunity to look at it, talk it through, see how I'm feeling about it before I make any decisions. And I'm realizing, yep, I still want to frog it, still not happy with it, don't like it. So, let's talk about what went wrong with the sleeve. So the pattern is designed with full-length sleeves, and that would explain why there is no short row shaping on the shoulders of this sleeve. And that's where I had a problem, because I'm doing short sleeves, or at least I had intended to do short sleeves. If I was to knit the sleeve with no shoulder shaping, it's just going to go straight out like a T. And when I put my arm down, I'm going to have lots of fabric underneath here and not very much up here. And I'm going to have an angled sleeve. And I did not want that. That wasn't the look I was going for. I knew it wouldn't make me happy about this pattern. At that point, I said, I give up. Done with this pattern. Done with trying to figure this out. I can't stand it anymore. So this pattern has been sitting unfinished since then. And now that I have shown it to you, I've given myself another period to look at it, think about it, see how I feel about it. I don't like it. I do not like it at all. I'm hoping that I will find the right pattern for this yarn. Third time will hopefully be the charm. I've got lots of other patterns that I can take a whack at with it, but for now, this has to be frogged. I can't even stand looking at it anymore. But there was my experience knitting the Antiquity blouse by Souffle Knitwear. It was not a good experience. So let's move on to a better experience. Here we have pattern number 2, my second Souffle tee by Laura Penrose. And this is the top that I ended up wearing to my shower. And why there was a third top, I'm going to get into when I talk about this pattern. So, this was the second pattern that I started as a bridal shower top. And I started this one around the same time as my Antiquity blouse because I was smart. I knew that I had had this, sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, experience with Souffle knitwear patterns. And I thought to myself, I want to set myself up for success. I'm going to knit a backup at the same time. And the reason that I knit this one at the same time as the Antiquity blouse is because the Antiquity blouse is a bottom-up style, and I knew that I wouldn't know until I was almost done the pattern whether or not it was working out and whether or not I liked the fit and the look and all of that. So I thought to myself, instead of doing all of that work, getting to almost the end of that pattern, possibly getting very close to my shower, and having my pattern not work out, I knew that that might make me shut down and give up making something for my bridal shower. And it was really important to me to wear something that I had knitted to my bridal shower because my wedding is one of the biggest events of my entire life. It might be the biggest event of my entire life. I don't know yet. And I knew I wanted to combine something that gave me so much joy, the marriage, the bridal shower, all of that, with something else that brings me incredible amounts of joy, knitting. And I decided that I would use a pattern that I could trust as my backup. Of course, I went with the Souffle. This is one of my favorite patterns that I have ever knitted, and it's the pattern that I wear the most out of everything that I've knitted for myself. And I only made it last year. It's also one of the prettiest patterns that I have, and it's super great for a nicer occasion. I usually wear my navy one if we go out on a date night, or if I need to have something dressy for work. That's what I pull out of my wardrobe. And I knew it was on my list to make myself a summery version because my navy version is made out of alpaca yarn and it's really stinking hot, especially when there's humidity because the alpaca just sucks in the moisture. I get really sweaty. It's not a fun experience. So I knew I wanted to have one that I could wear in a cooler fiber. And I knew I had this beautiful pale blue yarn in my yarn stash. This is Trailhead Yarn Company's 100% Tencel yarn. The line of yarn is called Cabot Trail, which is a location here in Nova Scotia, if you don't know about that. All of their yarns are named after trails. So there's Cabot Trail, Appalachian Trail, I'm not quite sure on the other ones, but those are the two that I'm aware of. And it's a lace weight yarn. You get a lot of yardage, but it is a fiber derived from wood pulp. And because that makes it a plant-based fiber, it's extremely good at providing ventilation in hot weather. And it was the perfect fiber to make myself a summer version of this top. Now, unfortunately for me, I also had a little hiccup knitting this pattern. So first of all, I knew exactly what size to make. I knew exactly how to do all of the finishing elements to this pattern. My one problem that I really should have known better is that I didn't have enough yardage. It's such a rookie error. I can't believe I made that mistake. And for a while, it looked like I wasn't even going to have a backup pattern, which is what led to the backup of the backup. Hence the reason I have a third pattern, which I'll talk about when I get to that one. But we're still talking about this one. So I knew from knitting the pattern before that this adorable little ruffle, which is my favorite element of this whole pattern, takes a lot of yarn. And I thought, okay, that's the number one place that I can save on yarn. I knew I had a matching mohair in my stash. This is Drops Kid Silk. It's in color 7, light blue, I think. But it is almost a dead ringer for the Trailhead yarns. And I thought to myself, I can save myself a bit of yardage with that. I actually weighed my mohair before and after I finished the ruffle, and it used, when I did the calculations, it used exactly 100 yards of the mohair. So I saved myself 100 yards. Based on my navy version that I made last year, I knew I needed more than the yarn that I had. So I had 2 skeins of this Tencel yarn. And they together are 1,600 yards. And my sample and my version last year used quite a bit more than that. So I thought, oh my gosh, I'm not going to have enough yarn. What am I going to do? And I didn't realize this till I was relatively far into the pattern. And then I thought, why not I just buy more yarn? You would think it would be that easy, right? Well, the skeins that I got were from one of my local yarn stores that was closing. None of the other local yarn stores carry this same yarn. And I looked online. Nobody had this color in stock. So I put out a call on Instagram, seeing if somebody had some of this yarn. And the yarn company actually directly messaged me and said that there was a store that had just purchased some of it and they were going to have it within a month. I thought that I would be able to wait for that yarn, but by the time that store finally got the yarn in stock, it was only a week or 2 before my shower. I didn't have time to wait for the extra yarn to come. So at that point, that's when I decided to do the backup to the backup, the 3rd pattern. And after I did the 3rd pattern, I wasn't totally sold on it as my bridal shower outfit. It just didn't feel right. And it didn't look right with the skirt. It's a beautiful pattern. I'm going to talk about it soon, but it just didn't work for the shower. So with a week left to my shower, I thought, okay, back to the drawing board. I had done the whole body of the sweater at that point. I'd even done all of my weaving in, my finishing, everything. All I had left were the sleeves. And a lot of people, when I showed the in progress version of it I think it was just in a reel on Instagram, they thought it looked really cute with the sleeves ending right at the ruffle. But what they couldn't see is that the sleeves technically didn't end right at the ruffle, because when you go to split for your body and sleeves, you're technically about 2 inches down from the ruffle, but because it's stockinette, it had curled up and it looked like it ended right at the ruffle. And I didn't like it ending right at the ruffle anyway. So what I did was I bought myself a digital scale that does 2 decimal points so I could make it as accurate as possible. And I divided my yarn equally into 2. And then I divided those 2 into 4 balls because at this point you're knitting 2-stranded. And I tried to get the longest length that I possibly could. And this is what I got. I cannot believe that I was fretting like mad that I would not have long enough sleeves for my comfort level, or even just a long enough sleeve that I would like the style. I thought I was going to have some dinky little sleeve that ended up here and I would feel like it looked kind of silly. But no, it actually looked really good. I'm really happy with these. The only thing that happened was that this one, I was able to use all blue yarn even on the underside of the folded hem. But I ran out of yarn for this one. So thankfully I had the exact same yarn in a different color in my stash, and I was able to do the underside of the folded hem in that other color. So in general, you don't see that at all. So really, no one's ever gonna know, except all of you who are watching, that the underside is a different color. So this is the top that I ended up wearing to my bridal shower. I wore it exactly like this. I love it to pieces, except for one little thing that I am going to be able to fix, and I might be able to fix it very soon. And that's that I find that the sleeves are a little big, and that is not an issue with the pattern. That is my choice of yarn. I knit this one exactly the same size as my navy alpaca version, but my navy one has tighter to the arm cuffs than this one does. And that's entirely because there's elasticity to the alpaca that is not here in the Tencel. Now I did all my decreases and everything. I did everything by the book, but these cuffs are too big for me. I don't like how big they are. They kind of stick out a bit sometimes. And I know exactly how to fix that. I am going to buy some 1/4-inch elastic, and I'm going to find my little section up here where I started and ended the bind off, and I'm going to feed that elastic through, get it to a point that I like how it feels, sew it together, and then just hide it in there. No one's ever going to know that that's there, but it's just going to pull in the cuff a little bit and give me a nice little poofy sleeve with a tight fitting cuff. So there is my second bridal shower pattern, my blue souffle tee. So this is what I ended up wearing to my shower, and it looked beautiful with the white skirt, and I even had blue Converse sneakers that matched the top perfectly. So it was the perfect outfit. I was so happy in it. I loved what I was wearing, and everyone loved the top, and I just felt like a blushing bride to be because I was wearing basically a bridal blue sweater. Which brings me to something I totally forgot to mention. The color name of this yarn. The color name of the yarn is actually called Unfortunate Bridesmaid. How could I not go with it for my bridal shower? And I used to joke with anyone that I was talking to about this color is that it really should be called Fortunate Bridesmaid, because I would be stoked to wear this color as a bridesmaid. I wouldn't be sad. I'd be very, very happy. So there was pattern number 2. Let's move on to pattern number 3. And now time for pattern number 3, the backup to the backup. So you've seen what I've gone through with the other 2 patterns. At this point in the game, I had started a pattern that I wasn't sure if it was going to work out or not. It ended up not working out. My one that I had been working on throughout that same process and same timeline, that was a pattern I could trust and rely on, I didn't have enough yarn to finish. At this point, I thought, okay, I need a pattern I know I can rely on to both fit me properly and get done within 2 weeks. Well, here comes my Botanical tee by Knititude to save the day. I have been a fan of Knititude's for a long time, and she is a fellow Canadian designer, and she has been a size inclusive designer for a long time. Some of her earlier patterns are not fully size inclusive, but her patterns, every pattern that she releases now is size inclusive. And this is one that I tested for her back in, I want to say February of 2021. It was still lockdown-ish. And I remember it was very cold because I finished it in either February or March. And I took outdoor pictures in Nova Scotia in a tank top and froze. But I loved my pictures. They turned out great. Anyway, I have knit that pattern twice before now. And one time I knit it within either 10 days or 12 days. So I knew I could whack out this pattern relatively quickly. And even though this one is also a bottom-up sweater, having previously made it, I knew it fit me and I knew it would work out. So I got to work on this pattern. And I have always loved this pattern. My 2 that I have already, I wear them a lot to work because they just look fancy enough to be like a nice blouse for work, but they're also incredibly comfortable. But there's a difference between those 2 versions and this version. And that, of course, is my yarn choice. It bit me again. My yarn choice bit me again. In a different way, actually. So my first 2 versions that I have of this top are knit using Lion Brand True Boo. And I'm going to share a picture of one of them here to show you how big and oversized and drapey it is. And you can kind of tell this one is not like that. This one is cropped, but that's for a different reason, which we'll get into in a second. And this one is pretty snug to my body. It's still a beautiful pattern. It's still a beautiful design. I'm still very happy about it. It just was not the right look I was going for my bridal shower. And for one thing, the color of the yarn didn't match the skirt. The skirt was a pure white. This is a cream. It just didn't look right. So that's why I ended up not wearing this for my bridal shower, but I am still very happy with this pattern, and it has a good place in my wardrobe now. I have worn it a couple times since then, and I'm going to talk to you about it now. So I chose to use some stash yarn for this because I knew I had a white or off-white yarn in my stash. I didn't realize how different it was from the skirt when I started it. Probably should have checked that before I started working on it. Oh well, lessons have been learned. I am moving on. So I had in my stash some discontinued yarn from Lion Brand that I'd actually won in a giveaway in 2020 because it was when I was at home during the first lockdown. And I won a contest on their Instagram page, and I got sent the yarn to make a different pattern. It was actually another Knititude pattern, and I did knit that pattern with the yarn, but it didn't work out for me, and I think it was because the yarn just wasn't right for the pattern. Anyway, I had frogged that yarn, and it was just sitting in my stash, and when I knew I needed a top for my bridal shower, and I wanted that top to be either a pastel color or some other bridal-y color, I thought, okay, let's try this. Hopefully this will work. The yarn is called Touch of Merino, and it is 90% acrylic, 10% merino, or 80% acrylic, 20% merino. It's a very small percentage of actual merino yarn. The rest is all acrylic. And I don't have anything against acrylic. I think acrylic has a time and a place. I think it's a great fiber to start with, especially when you don't necessarily want to spend a lot if you're just learning how to knit. And in some cases, I actually do like acrylic. I have an acrylic sweater that is actually the first sweater that I talked about on my podcast. It was my very first podcast episode. I'll link that below. And I actually really love that sweater, and I wear it quite a bit. And I love that if it gets dirty, I can just shove it in the washer and it can go through the washer. I don't have to treat it delicately or hand wash it or anything like that. So acrylic has a time and a place, and I don't mind working with acrylic, but it has been a long time since I've knitted with acrylic, and I don't have a lot of it left in my stash. So I usually only work with acrylic when I'm making something for somebody as a gift, which, you know, from watching my channel is not very often, or if it's going to be something that is going to go through a lot of wear and tear, such as a blanket. Acrylic is great for a blanket because if it gets dirty or if it gets smelly from the dog, I can just toss it in the laundry. But I haven't used it for a garment probably since I started my podcast. And it was fine to work with. Like, it doesn't have a bad feel to it. But I forgot acrylic doesn't really block much different than when it's knitting up. So what I mean by that is pretty much all natural fibers change kind of dramatically from when they are being knitted up to when they're blocked, either steam blocking or wet blocking. Like, for example, anything that's knit with pure wool is going to need to be blocked in order to even out your stitch tension and everything. Anything knit with a drapey fiber like cotton is going to grow dramatically when you block it because cotton absorbs a lot of water. So all of those natural fibers actually change quite a bit with blocking. I forgot that acrylic doesn't. So I knit the size that I knit when I did my first two versions of this top. And that's something that I find about Knititude's sizing is that I usually have to knit a size smaller than her size range tells me to. For whatever reason, even though I have perfect gauge, both row gauge and stitch gauge, her patterns are always too big if I pick the size based on my bust size. And I usually always go one size smaller with her patterns. So this is actually an extra large. And according to the sizing chart, I should knit a 2X. And with my bamboo versions, I knit size extra large, which is the size that I had applied to test knit, and I knew that that's the size that worked for me. So I figured if that's the size that I knit the first two times, I'm gonna knit the same size the third time. Not even thinking acrylic doesn't block out like bamboo does. So it fits fine. It just didn't give me that big, open, drapey version that I expected based on my first two versions. I made so many rookie errors in trying to create a top for my bridal shower. I think I was just getting to the point where I was making these silly mistakes because my brain was just going into overdrive about how desperately I wanted to have something that I made myself for my bridal shower, not even like pausing to think, is that the right thing to do? Is that the right yarn to use? Am I confident that I have enough yarn? Am I confident that I'm making the right size? I didn't even stop to think about these things, and I think it's just because I was giving myself so much pressure to make something because this was a deadline knit, and you know how I feel about deadline projects. I don't do well with them. I get anxious. I make silly mistakes, it turns out. Anyway, what's done is done. I have a third pattern now. I have a second finished top. I can wear it. It just wasn't the right one for my shower, which is fine. I knew when I was making this top that I wasn't making it just for the shower. I knew I was making it as something that I would wear to the shower and then wear again in my normal day-to-day life because of how often I wear the other versions. So it was never going to be just this like one-time special occasion knit. It was going to be part of my normal wardrobe as well. So when I finished it and I realized it wasn't quite right for the bridal shower outfit, it didn't really upset me too much. That's kind of when the gears started going about fixing the blue one and knitting with whatever yarn I had left, which ended up working out great. So when I finished this one, I thought, you know what? This is still a really good top to have for work. And at first I was disappointed that it didn't fit like my other two versions. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, you know what? I love that pattern. What I love the most is this central leaf lace motif. It doesn't bother me that it's a snugger fit, that it's a cropped fit. In fact, that gives me other ways that I can wear this pattern that I can't with my existing versions because those ones are big and drapey. If I'm wearing them with something high-waisted, I have to like do a little French tuck and have it sort of like fold over or like blouse over my pants or my skirt or whatever. This one can be more of a streamlined fit and can look really great with my high-waisted pants and skirts. I could even wear it over a dress if I wanted to because it has that higher waistline. So it has that higher waistline because I made a mistake. Mistake after mistake after mistake with all of these patterns. The moral of this story, of this podcast: don't knit anything under pressure. Don't knit anything that's on a deadline because you're gonna make mistakes. Or at least I'm going to. Anyway, it's giving me lots to talk about here. This is going to be a really long podcast episode. Anyway, it is too short because I wasn't counting my repeats properly, and I have one fewer leaves than I'm supposed to. This is supposed to have 5 sets of repeats before the underarm, and then another 5 more. So you're supposed to have this nice, really deep armhole, and you're supposed to have more of a hip length for the entire top. I have a waist length, and I have very small underarms, and I now have a cropped version of this sweater. Do you know what, though? It still looks good. It still fits me really nicely. It's just different than my other versions, and I've realized I'm okay with that. I'm okay with all the mistakes that I made. I still have 2 really good tops that I'm going to be wearing a lot in my normal day-to-day wardrobe. And I hope I've learned from my mistakes. We'll find out in the future, I guess. But here was pattern number 3 of my bridal shower patterns. Here ends the bridal shower top saga. If you've stuck with me this long, I appreciate your commitment. This has been a lot to go through, and I hope I wasn't rambling too much, but I hope you enjoyed hearing all about the trials and tribulations of these 3 patterns. But now I thought I would talk as a group about all 3 patterns to answer the question that I always ask myself in these episodes: will I knit this pattern again? So let's start with the first one, the Antiquity blouse. I think everybody can guess what I'm going to say about this one. Never making that pattern again, and likely never making a Fable knitwear pattern again. I'm constantly drawn in by her beautiful vintage inspired designs, but I now know through multiple trial and errors, they just don't work for my body. And I just don't think that they work for anyone over a certain size. And unfortunately, that is on the designer. It's on the fact that the patterns aren't graded very well for bigger sizes. And, you know, I really hate saying anything negative about any designer because it is a lot of work to put together a pattern. It's a lot of work to put together a garment pattern. It's a lot of work to put together a size-inclusive garment pattern. I'm in awe of the designers out there creating incredible patterns. But unfortunately, there are some that are better than others, and this one just wasn't good for me and my body size, and especially not my body shape. So I won't be knitting any more of her patterns, and it is unfortunate. I think part of it comes down to the fact that I know from experience that Helen rarely gets plus size testers for her patterns. And she does usually have a note on all of her pattern pages on Ravelry that if the size that you want to knit hasn't been tested, she will work with you to exchange the pattern for testing notes. Which, you know, I've heard of some people that have taken her up on that offer. I've tested for her a couple times, and I like to think that my testing notes have helped with some of the designs. I know for sure that they helped with the one that didn't work out very well, because I was able to give her advice on what worked and what didn't. But in general, I'm just tired of putting all of that effort into a pattern and having it not work out. So, Antiquity blouse, never again. But the Souffle tee, this is my second version, and I can tell you now, I already have plans for a third one. And I'm going to use the same yarn that I used for this one. So like I mentioned when I showed you the underside of the cuff, I have the exact same yarn in a different color. It's in a super pale pink, and I have 3 skeins of it, not just 2. So I know from experience that I can get a full t-shirt version out of 2 skeins. I'm going to try to get either full length sleeves or even 3/4 length sleeves from the other yarn. And that's because I want to have a long sleeved version so that I can have it as a nice blouse for longer throughout the year. So I have a pink blouse in my wardrobe already that I've had for many years, and as much as I like it, I don't wear it very often because I find that it's kind of tight across the shoulders. But I love that style, and I love the color. And I know I want to have that in my wardrobe, and I want to wear that. But it's never comfortable when I put it on, so I always take it off. But I thought to myself, the Souffle tee long sleeve version is actually quite similar to it. And I'm going to try to knit a longer sleeved version of the Souffle in this pale pink yarn that actually looks really similar in color to the store-bought blouse that I have. So it's on my list to replace the store-bought blouse with a hand knit version instead. So Souffle tee, definitely making again. And let's be honest, that third one probably won't even be my last one. I love this pattern so much. I wear it all the time. So I might just have a closet full of souffles at some point in my life. And third, the Botanical tee. Given that it's kind of like my fallback pattern, I'll probably make that one again too. I really love that that one's also a relatively quick knit. So if I need something on a bit of a deadline, which I try not to do, but as you can tell, I kind of found myself in that situation this time. If I find myself in this situation again, I know I can rely on that pattern. But now that I've knitted in another fiber, I know what I need to do if I still want to have that blousey, drapey, oversized look, or settle with the cropped style as well. So after going through all of these patterns, wanting to remake 2 out of 3 ain't that bad. So it's been about 3-4 months since my last podcast. I have done quite a bit of reading in that time too, but I am limiting my book reviews this episode to just 2 books. The first one is a romance book. It is Weather Girl by Rachel Solomon. I was given this book by Doyle as part of our year of books, so this was one of the ones that I opened. And I opened this one for February, but I didn't actually read it until maybe April because I lent it to my mom first and she read it first. It is one of my favorite romances that I've ever read because they are adults and they act like adults. Let me talk a little more about that. So, in many romance novels, there's a bit of a formula that they follow. There's initial attraction. There is the first romantic encounter. There is a growing relationship. Then there's more romantic encounters. And then when you get about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through, suddenly something comes up that tears them apart. And they have to overcome that to get back together by the end of the book to follow the formula. And in a lot of romance books, the thing that tears them apart is usually something ridiculous, or it's something that could have easily been avoided, particularly something that involves communication. A lot of the times, romance couples have great chemistry, but terrible communication. What I loved about this book is that they had great communication, and the thing that tore them apart 3/4, 2/3 of the way through was something that made sense. And it was something that you could easily see putting a pause on a relationship or causing someone to take a step back from a newly forming relationship and then work through that thing and come together in the end. So Weather Girl is about 2 people who work at the same news station. Ari is the titular weather girl. She does the weather at this TV station, and Russell is the sports commentator at the same TV station. And it's kind of cute because at this TV station, the 2 main anchors, or I think one's the anchor and one's the manager of the news, are a husband and wife that have divorced. And the wife is Ari's boss and the husband is Russell's boss. And they realize that the divorced couple is bringing significant negative energy into the work environment, and they sort of plot to bring the husband and wife back together. And of course, while trying to get 2 other people to come together, these 2 come together. And it's one of the sweetest romances that I've ever read. And I think what I loved the most about it, and this is the first time I've ever read a romance like this, Russell is a plus-size male love interest. I've never read that in a book before, and I absolutely loved it, and it was handled so respectfully, and it was just one of the things that made him a really great love interest and a really great male protagonist. And it just worked so well with Ari, and their relationship was just a beautiful budding relationship, and everything in it felt like it could have been a real relationship out there in the regular world. And I think that's what I loved the most about it, is that I could see this actually happening to real people. And it made me love them even more because of that. So I don't want to give away any more details in case you want to go read this yourself if you're a romance fan, but I do highly, highly, highly recommend this book. So my second book review for this podcast episode is quite a bit different. And it is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. And I have to say, if you haven't read any of Gabrielle Zevin's books, you're missing out. I don't like to tell people what to read because everybody has a completely different taste. But to me, Gabrielle Zevin is one of those authors that is just such a beautiful writer. I just think it's amazing how she comes up with the way that she writes, the dialogue, the things that the characters feel and speak and everything. Like, it's a beautiful little package all rolled into one. And this one is probably not the one that I would recommend that you start with. I reviewed her other book. Well, she has many books. I reviewed another one of her books, The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry, in one of my previous podcast episodes. I don't remember which one. But that would be the one that I would recommend starting with for Gabrielle Zevin. I have it on my list to read some of her other books. I just haven't gotten to them yet. But this is her newest released book. This just came out last year. I gave it to Doyle for Christmas Eve. We have this adorable little tradition where we give each other a book on Christmas Eve. It's based on an Icelandic tradition, which if I try and say the name, I will completely butcher it, where you give each other a book on Christmas Eve as well as chocolate, and you spend Christmas Eve reading and eating chocolate. Who doesn't love that, right? Anyway, I gave this to Doyle for Christmas Eve. It was also the winner of the Goodreads Book of the Year award, and it won by a landslide. This book is really, really popular right now. It's also very well reviewed. It's got a lot of great critical reviews. It is a book. This book is an emotional journey. So I cannot give anything away about this book because it has to be experienced. But I will give you a bit of a rundown on what it's about. The story is about Sam and Sadie, who meet as friends when Sam is in the hospital and Sadie is visiting her sister in the hospital, and they bond over playing video games together. As they grow older, they realize they both have an affinity for math and for coding and all kinds of stuff like that, and they meet again in university, and they decide to start a gaming company together, and they design a video game together. And basically, the book follows their lives from when they're children to, I think, 30s or 40s. It doesn't get all the way through their lives, but it gets like into a bit of a chunk of their adult lives. And it's about their relationship together as friends. It's never a romantic relationship. It's always a friend relationship. Sometimes it's just a coworker relationship. Sometimes it's not even a good relationship. But it's about Sam and Sadie as people. So what I love the most about this book is the writing. I think Gabrielle Zevin is one of the most beautiful writers out there. And even when she is breaking your heart, she is doing it in such a beautiful way that you can't be mad at her about it. And I won't tell you anything else about this book, but if you've already read it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you have read this book, feel free to commiserate with me, but please don't spoil it for anybody else because this book just needs to be experienced without knowing what happens. And it is just a beautifully written book. And that's all I can say about it. It's just beautifully written. I love her as an author. It's a journey of a book. You'll get to the other side and you'll just breathe. And that finishes this probably pretty long podcast episode. I'll do my best to wrap this up quickly. Oh, wait, Bennett has something to say about this. Can you hear his yowling? Hi, you gonna come up? Hi. Here's my kitty. So Bennett is here to also help me say goodbye. You gonna say goodbye? If you're a new viewer, thank you so much for joining me. And if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate it. This was the second in my knitted wedding series. So if you would like to be notified of any new videos coming out, feel free to subscribe to my channel and hit that bell icon so that you get notified when the next video goes live. And okay, goodbye. Also, while you're here, check out some of my other videos. I mainly do podcast episodes and pattern roundup videos, but of course, there's some special videos such as this new My Knitted Wedding series. Thank you so much for joining me today, and everyone, take care and happy knitting!